Hi, so this presentation is about poverty in education in Canada. Poverty refers to someone's income level. It's separated into two different categories. So we have relative poverty and absolute poverty. Relative poverty refers to someone who lacks the resources needed to live according to a society's norms. So this leads to social exclusion because the person doesn't have access to everything the society has access to. When we mention poverty in education, it refers to relative poverty rather than absolute poverty. Absolute poverty is the term of poverty that we most use in life. It's the incapacity of a household to meet their basic needs for an extended period of time. So when we say that someone is poor, usually that's what we refer, but not in this presentation. Poverty in Canada, absolute poverty in Canada is assessed by the low income cutoff, the Canadian low income cutoff. So that's a cutoff per city and per residence of a household that assess if someone is considered poor in terms of absolute poverty or not. In the graph we see right here from Statistics Canada, we can see the percentage of children in each province that is considered poor according to the LICO rate. Quebec's children have a percentage of less than 15% who are considered poor. So when we refer to poverty in education, as I said, we refer to relative poverty. This leads to social exclusion because children who are considered poor do not have access to the same resources other children might have access to. When we say poverty in education, once again, we refer to a minor student's family income level. So it will not be the student himself who is poor, but his household. Consequences of poverty in education established by Levin and Seguin et al. Include an increased risk of cognitive underdevelopment, a limitation of social skills, and a limitation of educational achievement. Once again, social exclusion is explained through these consequences because, for example, educational achievement, well, a child who is considered poor does not have access to the same quality schools, to the same quality education as another child might be. In this presentation, more of these examples will be provided by my colleagues. So as you can see on the graph, once again, Manitoba has a percentage of children who are considered poor that is around 22%. The reason why I say this is because it's one of the highest percentages, and the province of Manitoba has started in the fall of 2021 a task force on poverty and education to review the education system from kindergarten to age 12 and try to limit the consequences of poverty on students' education. Their focus is on food access and security, limiting the barriers of participation by those students, like access to technology and transportation, and increasing the outcomes and continuity of education for children in care. So the goal of this task force is really to ensure that every student has the same opportunities of succeeding in school. In this presentation, the first concept that will be used to analyze poverty in education is symbolic interactionism. Beatrice will be going over the low set expectations of society and what those expectations have, like what are the consequences of those expectations on students. She'll be going over the underemphasis on their learning development and providing graduation rates for poor children in schools in Canada. The second concept is conflict theory, which Paul will be going over. He will be looking at the inequalities and choice limitations of poor children. The last concept is the structure of education in Canada, which Musaha will be looking at. She will try to assess the relationship between the different types of education in Canada. The different types of education, but more about private and public schools, which are considered regular types of education. However, those types of education provide inequalities among students, and she will be trying to understand that through the concept of the structure of education. The reason why we chose those concepts was, first of all, for symbolic interactionism, to understand the relationship between poverty and inequality and what this relationship created, this never-ending cycle that students have to experience in school. For conflict theory, we understood that inequalities, as mentioned for the previous one, was at the core of poor students' education journey. And conflict theory really is the best theory to understand how inequalities persist in students' lives. And for the last one, the structure of education, is because we understand that the expectations of society do impact poor children, but the problem doesn't only come from society or in classrooms settings. They also come from the structure of education, and there is a problem in that. So my colleagues will be going over those concepts with you.
So I'll be talking about symbolic interactionism related to poverty. According to LeBron 2022, symbolic interactionism emphasizes how interactions between people create social structures and society. Thus, a Thomas theorem was created in order to explain what the symbolic interactionism is, and it states what is real in its own consequences. What that means is that people live up to our expectation, where they're going to change or adapt their behavior in order to try to meet that expectation. Thus, Ritter developed 7 principles in order to help explain the Thomas theorem. Symbolic interactionism and poverty. Low-income students are put at a disadvantage because of teachers' expectation. Thus, those students have to live through different opportunities in education. The educational system reinforces the cycle of poverty. If you look at the image on the left, you can see that there's 2 different realities, the low-income student and the high-income student. You can see that they have different types of resources, where the low-income student actually has none, and the high-income student has a computer, has a soccer ball, and has a perfect slide in order to stimulate his brain and to help him succeed in school. For the low-income student, it's hard to live up to the teacher's expectation because he doesn't have any outside resources to help him succeed in school, thus creating a division between students. Symbolic interactionism and poverty. Teacher's expectation. According to Barquette and Clenkhorn, 2008, page 39 to 40, the educational system creates inequality among the students, which Paul is going to talk more in depth about later in the presentation. Teachers' expectation limits minority group, where teachers put their focus on the reality of the dominant group rather than everyone. Low-income students are more likely to do poorly in school because of the teacher's expectation. For example, a teacher expects that a student from grade 1 passes to grade 2 that acquires the reading skill. But if that student has more difficulty in that skill and has difficulty reading, he's going to be put at a disadvantage because of compared to the other students. But the teacher doesn't look at the reality of everyone, where that student may come from a low-income family. The parents may not have the resources, may not have the money to pay the resources or books to help him read and be able to acquire that skill. Maybe the parents did not have the time or the opportunity to read to them at a young age for him to encounter more words at a young age. Thus, Riley et al. 2008 suggests that the teacher's expectation provides negative impact in the long run for students. Carolyn Purcell and Aboriginal people. According to UPAL 2017, in Statistics Canada, they provide an overview of non-Aboriginal people and Aboriginal people and their educational attainment. Thus, 8.5 of non-Aboriginal men has less than a high school diploma, has less than a high school basically, and 20.1 Aboriginal men has less than a high school. 4.9 has a non-Aboriginal woman has less than a high school, and 15.9 of Aboriginal women has less than a high school. Also, Maxine and al. 2001 suggests that Aboriginal people earn a lower income than non-Aboriginal people. So according to Carolyn Purcell, a low income and a minority group, which is the Aboriginal people, are put at a disadvantage in school because of teachers' expectation. So we can conclude from the graph that a low income, a student that lives in a low income are put at a disadvantage in school because of the expectation teacher has upon them. Also, teacher has generalized their expectation for everyone. They do not provide help to the people that need that help, and they do not provide extra resources for the ones that do not have the opportunity to have some. Aboriginal versus poverty. Aboriginal students, according to Riley and al. 2008, Aboriginal students have a lower graduation rate. Why? Again, because of teachers' expectation towards those students. Some teachers provide some racist comments and discriminate Aboriginal students. They are put aside, they have an unfair chance to education, and they're also put into special classes where they should not be put. Thus, this reduces their chances of learning and educational achievement, like Nadia said before. Another example is Atawa-Pasca. From the reading we read at the beginning of the semester, according to Robson 2013, Atawa-Pasca did not have access to schools. We as human beings learn from social interactions and environment. So this shows to them that they are not a priority and that education is not a priority for them. This also shows that education was not accessible to them. Also that they did not have the opportunity to learn and gain knowledge in schools, where they had to gain knowledge in the workforce. This also reminds them that school is reserved for only the high income people, not for them, which also creates a division.
Hi, so for my part, I'm going to talk about our chosen topic, poverty, and I'm going to use the conflict theory perspective. Also, throughout my presentation, I'm going to answer some questions, such as how does poverty affects education? How does the inequality created by poverty impacts education? And also how and why certain groups have advantages and other disadvantages. Let's start with the relationship between socioeconomic status and schooling. Obviously, we cannot talk about poverty without mentioning socioeconomic status. And according to a scholar journal, Educational Responses to Poverty by Benjamin Levin, socioeconomic status was and it's still the best predictor of how much schooling students will obtain, how well they will do at their studies, and what are their life prospects beyond school. In this journal, there are also many Canadian researchers that confirm that poverty has negative influence on students' behavior, students' achievement, and student retention in school. So basically, a rich student is not going to have the same behavior, achievement, and retention in school than a poor student. Now, let's go deeper into the conflict theory. So the conflict theory is a theory that believes that society is based upon inequality and competition over limited resources. It believes that inequality is created in society and that society is not good, it's not fair, and it's the root of all issues in society. There are also two important principles we need to understand about this theory. The first is that power is at the core of all social relationships. So the relationship we have with people in society, power is at the core of it. The second is that the powerful promote their interests at the expense of the weak. But how and why this is a problem? This is a problem because the dominant group, the powerful, as I was saying, promote their interests at the expense of the weak. Therefore, they maintain their control through dominant ideology. So basically, they're the one deciding what is the desirable ideas, what are the desirable set of beliefs, what are the desirable dress code, what are the desirable languages. So I can keep going. I think you get the point. So the static culture, they are the one that decide all those things. And this is a cycle because since they're the one deciding those things, they're also the one benefiting that benefit from those things. So they decide and they benefit, and it keeps going, and it excludes other people, the lower class people, from that control. However, how does this have an impact on education? Since we're talking about education, so we want to understand how poverty has an impact on education. It has an impact because it creates a division. What kind of division? It creates the public and the private school. And my teammate Musahat is going to talk more deeply and more specifically about the difference between public and private schools. But here I wanna talk about the consequence of that division. So that division contributes to inequality, and it affects students' education. Why? Because it gives advantages to a certain group of people, the elite students, the one in private school, and it disadvantages a lower class student, the one in public school. And how does it gives advantages and disadvantages? So as I was saying, we have a division, public and private. And the public have the lower class students, the one in public, have different and less demanding curriculum, so lower streams. So, and one of the reasons is that they do not have the same cultural traits as the elite student. For instance, linguistic skill. So the public school students don't have the same linguistic skill as the private school student. And also school operate within the elaborated code. And this is an advantage for private school student and disadvantages to public school student, because the higher class student, they're already like in this elaborated code. They grew up in this elaborated code. So they have access to knowledge through general principle that guide them. So they're already in the elaborated code, so it gives advantages to them. And I want also quickly talk about what Beatrice said about teachers' expectation. And in addition to the fact that they have a less demanding curriculum, teachers' perspective limited minority group. So that's another disadvantages on public school students. Thank you.
Hi, I will be talking about the structure of education in Canada and then link it to poverty. So in Canada, education is not a federal responsibility, but it is a provincial one. So the Education Acts can change from province to province. The The Education Acts are the organization and delivery of the curriculum, the student eligibility, duties of the employees, the types of programs, and the accountability measures. Now I will be talking about how structure of education in Canada divided like the education system. So there can be rich students on one side and then poor students on the other. And that is with private and public schools. So in private schools, they get to select their students, they get to change the tuition, and if they follow the provincial and territorial curriculum, the government will also pay a fixed fee per year. And in order to get into a private school, you need to pay tuition. This is according to this is from Le Point's PowerPoint. And in public school, they do not select the students, they cannot change the tuition, and the government will pay a fixed fee per year. So already with this, that we can see that if you do not have the money if you don't have the money to get higher education, you will end up in a public school, which is free. Now I will be giving some unfair examples of what private schools have that public schools do not. And yeah, so in the private schools, they have smaller classes with less students. So students can benefit from that because they get to have more individual attention. And a quote that I found on EduCanada's website was, students may benefit from specialized programming. In public schools, the classes are much bigger and there are more students because public schools, they have more students in general and like the school. So a negative consequence of that is that the students get less individual attention and less help from the teacher. And most of the students in public high school, they are from low-income families or they are poor, so getting help outside of school can be hard because parents may not speak the language or not understand what is being taught at school. Private high schools could include boarding schools, international baccalaureate programs, or schools for students with learning disabilities and more. And like Beatrice mentioned in her part, 20.1% of men and 15.9% of women, they do not graduate public high school. So rich students, they get access to way more and they have way more resources than public students. They only have the minimum. So if you want to have more, you need to pay. Why is there such a big percentage of students not graduating public high school? Public school is because they don't have the same technology, they don't have the same resources and the same help, and they also don't have the money. So we can see that poor students are more tempted to leave school. So what I mean by that is that the poor students will not get better or further education, which will lead to them remaining poor in the future, and rich students who get to pay for these resources will eventually get into higher and better education, which will lead to more money. So the education structure was kind of created as that poor students remain poor in the future, rich students remain rich or become even richer. Also in 2019-2020, almost 5 million of students attend public school and only 400,000 of them attend private schools. So this is from Statistic Canada's website. And the main reason is because if you want to get into a private school, you need to pay, and it is expensive. So most families living in poverty, so low income, or like I said, living in poverty, they will send their students in like a free school. Also, a quote that I found in one of the articles that I was reading was the following. Gorski describes how a culture of classism present in many schools lead teachers to hold low expectations for poor children's achievement. So basically, there's like discrimination in schools where just because the students have does not have a good background, they are the expectations of them are seen as low. This was from Sue. And from the same articles, I took notes of some issues that were present in the public schools, and these are the following. So students have no food, no clothes. It's hard for them to get into the programs or activities that they want because of financial struggle of their families or the school in general. Just because the government pay for the school does not mean that the money is fairly divided or that there is enough money for all of the students in the school. And teachers feel hopeless and helpless. So in conclusion, the structure of education in Canada is created so that poor students will remain poor in the future and rich students will have a chance to continue being rich because they have access to better education. Thank you for listening.